Welcome everyone. Glad to see you on my channel. Today I will tell you about an unusual story, an amazing story about companionship and love. I wish you a pleasant audience. Every time she went to work, Anne literally told herself to be patient, not understanding how long this nightmare could go on. Until recently, she happily worked as a nurse in one of the surgical departments of the city hospital. The girl knew from childhood what she would be when she grew up, and after graduating from medical school, she plunged headlong into her new profession. She worked day and night, agreeing to any schedule or shift. It was not so much for the money, which, of course, was needed, as for the pleasure of doing what she loved. Patients on the ward tried to get a shot or an IV just for her, and said that she did procedures like a magician. That would have been all right. But Anne, since the orphanage where she grew up had no tolerance for injustice and lies. The fact was that the head of the department where she worked regularly deceived patients. She made unsubstantiated conclusions and prescriptions, the purpose being to extract as much money as possible from the patients. Anne, who was herself from a poor, remote village, saw that many had barely saved for a trip to see the local luminary. And once she heard how Leo, that was the name of the manager, draws not a bright prospect for a fragile girl who came with her elderly mother, she decided to restore justice, having received a diploma. She had a good outlook and knew that in this situation you can prescribe a much more affordable treatment, and the disease itself wasn't as dangerous as she'd been prescribed. She heard the girl, barely able to hold back her tears, reassuring her mother, "Everything will be all right, Mommy. We'll definitely find the money, and you'll be healthy." In the corridor, the patient's daughter made long telephone calls to someone, and most likely the calls did not bring the desired result. The girl sat down on a bench in the corridor and cried. This was the last straw in the nurse's patience. Anne put herself in that poor girl's shoes at that moment. Anne waited until the doctor came out after his rounds, and, approaching in a quiet but determined voice, began, "You understand that this family obviously does not have the money for the treatment that you prescribed, and they don't need it." For a moment he was taken aback by this insolence, but then literally hissed back, "What do you allow yourself? Who do you allow yourself? Who do you think you are? Go back to your place and do your job." From that day on, all hell broke loose at the hospital for Anne. She went to work scared and didn't know what Leo would have to do once again. He was not ashamed of either the staff or the patients, and now he told her off for every little thing. And if he did not find anything to complain about in his work, he was sure to go over her physical appearance. The fact is that Anne was, as they say, blood with milk. Tall, overweight, but very charming. She never thought about her appearance. The girl was larger than her peers from birth and was already used to taunts and sneers in her address. But that all remained in childhood. Now it became the cause of ridicule by her colleagues, which turned out to be much more offensive. One morning, as she was getting ready to take her shift, Leo walked in. He was in a great mood, said hello to the nurses, defiantly turning his back to Anne. Then, as if remembering, turned to her. "I was thinking you might want to lose some weight, and your knowledge is not enough to work in our department as a nurse. So I thought it would be good for you to work as a nurse, and it would be very suitable for a simple country girl like you." On the way to the door, he turned and threw angrily aside, "I hope the floors and windows are shiny and the ships are taken out regularly. Now you'll be busy all day with physical labor, and you won't have time to think about nonsense or meddle in your own business." He smiled and winked at the local beauty and headed for the exit. At that moment, Anne wanted to run away, hide, or simply burst into tears, but she knew that neither pity nor there was no one to comfort her, and she was not going to show weakness in front of this despot. The whole team, from the first minutes of the conflict of the village, Simpleton and the famous surgeon in the city, of course, took his side, Above Anne only joked and laughed, saying, "It was necessary to do their job quietly, and do not interfere where it is not necessary." Such a simpleton was taken by one of the best hospitals in town. But no, she decided to fight for the truth, they whispered behind her back. It was easy for the local beauty to reason. The girl herself was not from a rich family, but her mother and grandmother worked 3 jobs, so she did not need anything, but the beauty was not interested, because she blew her salary in restaurants and discos, not thinking about what she would live on. Around Lilia always hovered crowds of admirers, and every other patient gave her flowers and candy. The bosses also treated her very leniently. Others would have been fired for the violations that she made, but she could only smile and say to Lily, "How come? Get it together and try, and no more." And she answered fake, lowered her eyes, and smiling shyly could say, "I do not understand how it happened. I swear never again." How could a spoiled beauty understand Anne, who had no one to take care of her for a long time? For years the girl had counted only on herself. And now she decided to endure at all costs. She had to live on something. Now, when the girl was cleaning the wards or scrubbing the floors in the hospital corridor, she often thought back to the past, not understanding why life gives her such a test. Anne had never seen her parents. To be exact, her mother's picture had always hung by her bedside in her grandmother's house, and she had managed to keep one very small card and always carried it with her. But that was all that was left of my mother. Even as a child, very rarely, when asked about her mother, Grandma Emma lamented that the doctor, Lucius, had ruined her daughter. If she were in town, they'd help her. The untutors ruined the young one, who had not lived and are walking the earth themselves. Sometimes she went on saying, she didn't want the baby, but your mother was stubborn. Once she made up her mind, she couldn't change her mind. Anne drew only one conclusion from such lamentations. She could not be called the child she wanted. Her mother died within the first 24 hours of giving birth. But that, again, was according to her grandmother. They lived then in such a remote place where the only doctor was rarely sober. My grandmother told me that the girl's mother went to the big city to study and earn money, and she came home with nothing and pregnant. In such rare moments, Grandma would cry quietly, wiping away a tear with the corner of her handkerchief. But if suddenly a girl tried to ask something about her father, Grandmother would immediately close the subject. The wind in the field is your father, a hurricane in the sky. You will not find and you will not catch. Go and don't ask again. The girl knew at once that the subject was closed, and not a word could be got out of her grandmother any further. On such days, Grandma would walk around frowning, muttering something under her nose, evidently scolding the unknown father. She was strict but fair. Anne knew that she loved and pitied her very much, but tried not to show it. They lived poorly, but the girl always had everything she needed. Her pension was small, and her grandmother swept the floors at the post office almost to her last day. Neighbors who could help gave things from their children. Grandma, not wanting to offend, accepted everything. Then in the evening she closed herself on the veranda, and examining carefully, she selected only the good things. She washed and ironed them, and in the morning they were beautiful, almost like new clothes. "Oh, why are you frozen? Did you fall asleep?" Anne was brought back from the past by the cry of the head nurse. "Look, now Leah will see you sleeping on the move. She'll take her bonus for sure," one she added, and walked off down the hall. Anne sighed and thought that she could forget about the bonus altogether now. The evil lion, as that was her nickname for the surgeon, would definitely do his best to make sure she didn't get it. The girl sighed and, after changing the water in the bucket, went to wash the floors in the hallway. Anne scrubbed the floors, but mentally she was far away from that day again, In the past, filled with sad memories of change and betrayal, she often remembered one of the worst days of her life. The day her grandmother died. She came home from school and immediately sensed something was wrong. There was no smell of food in the house, and her grandmother made no noise with the dishes. She always cooked dinner when her granddaughter came home, but here the girl saw her lying on the floor by the door with her eyes open, as if she were staring at the ceiling. She first tried to call quietly, but even at the age of 12, she realized that the irreparable had happened. Breaking her head, she ran to the neighbors, sobbing as she went. Tears mixed with rain clogged her eyes, and the girl almost fell several times, but tried to run as fast as possible. She was frightened in her heart. It seemed that the faster she reached, the faster her grandmother would be helped. After crossing the neighbor's threshold, Anne began to wave toward her house and whisper, Grandma fell from the powerlessness and does not get up. And then it was like a dream. The neighbors rushed, all sobbing, stroking her head and reading, You orphan, how are you now? Who needs you now? Who needs you now? But that night they put her to bed with the neighbors, and they were whispering and talking about something for a long time. The women were crying. Every now and then the men went out into the yard to smoke. Immediately after her grandmother's funeral, Anne was placed in an orphanage which was in the nearest town. Anne was not very sociable as it was, and there, in general, she withdrew and did not talk to anyone. More often than not, you could see her sitting somewhere on the sidelines with books or at the door of the medical office. She could spend hours studying posters and pamphlets on medical topics. A young doctor who worked at the orphanage drew attention to this picture. One day, she quietly approached the girl who was studying the medical poster again and asked, Are you interested? Do you want to see what's in the office? But you want to see what's in the office, Anne, without hesitation, began nodding her head quickly, as if afraid she would change her mind. Holding her breath, the girl stared at the medical instruments, and from that day on she became a frequent visitor to the Temple of Medicine. It seemed to her then that the lives of all the residents of the orphanage depended on this doctor. She even thought that if this woman had been near her grandmother and mother, they would surely be alive. After all, no matter who came to this office with what kind of pain, she would always leave with a smile on her face. The pain would definitely stay behind that door. It was probably one of those moments when she decided to train to be a medical professional and help people. She wanted to become the same kind of magician who could cure any disease. She prepared diligently for admission, and when the time came, she became a medical student without a problem. The doctor at the medical school, Helga, was always there to help and support her in everything. By then, Anne was unrecognizable. She had changed from a little girl to a statuesque beauty with a long braid. She was very different from her classmates, who talked only about boys and diets. Therefore, the beauties were surprised when the fat girl, as they used to call her from childhood, began to wait at the gate of the boarding school town, Handsome. It became clear why the girl's eyes recently radiated some unprecedented brilliance. She looked prettier, and even at her weight, she became airy and floating. It turned out that the girl had fallen in love, and the feelings were mutual. They met by chance. Anne loved to wander in the park near the nearest lake, which was very close to the orphanage. In good weather, she could sit on the shore, forgetting about the time. When the weather was bad, she just wandered through the alleys, dreaming of the future or remembering the past. On one of those days, she was almost run over by a guy on a bicycle. Either she was clumsy or he couldn't make the turn. They both apologized awkwardly at first, then laughed, and the young man suggested, I, as a gentleman, am obliged to apologize. So I suggest, in this dank weather, that you have a cup of coffee and try a very tasty pie. They're excellent at the local coffee house, the girl, of course, agreed. They drank what she thought was delicious coffee and discussed books, which, as it turned out, were read by the same people. Then they wandered around for a long time and talked about everything. They didn't want to part at all, and the young people arranged to meet there the next day. Then every day Jack, that was the young man's name, stood at the entrance of the boarding school waiting for his bell. The roommates whispered in bewilderment. What could this handsome city boy find in the village commoner? But every time they met, it was as if the couple did not notice anything or anyone around them. They enjoyed every day, every moment spent together. After graduating from high school, Anne had no problem getting into medical school. The first and perhaps the only one who congratulated her on this joyous event was Jack. With a huge bouquet, he met her, kissed her, and said, "You're just a clever girl. I did not even doubt that you will get." He supported Anne almost always and in everything, and became the closest and dearest person to the girl during this time. Everything in the couple's relationship was so easy and joyful that Anne never once wondered why Jack was in no hurry to introduce her beloved to her parents. The lovers had already dreamed of how, after serving in the army, the guy would return, and they would play a wedding. On seeing her beloved off to the army, Anne cried and said, "Well, it's all right, it's only temporary, and the separation will only strengthen our love." "My love," Jack wiped the tears from her cheeks and whispered in her ear with a smile, "Horse dear, before you know it, I'll be here." The young man was drafted into the army, 1,000 miles away, and the only salvation for the girl was the letters which she waited impatiently for. They were frequent at first, with many tender words, but with each month, the letters began to come less and less frequently and became something cold, friendly. The closer her beloved's return came, the fewer letters there were, and didn't think about it. She was counting the days until his return, but it did not happen in the way she had expected. One day, as she was returning from the college to the dormitory where she had lived all her years of study, she was called over by the janitor. "Here's soldier came to see you." He didn't wait, gave her a message. The girl immediately recognized the handwriting. She kept all of his letters in a box with white shoes, bought for the occasion. She had already imagined what it would be like at their wedding. Anne looked again at the envelope. There was not a single postmark on it. The letter had obviously been brought to the dormitory and not mailed. The girl smiled happily, for that meant that her sweetheart had arrived. She thought for a moment that her sweetheart was in a hurry and decided to surprise her. She was sure that the envelope indicated the place and time of their long-awaited meeting. Anne ran into the room, forgetting to thank the janitor for the letter, and without undressing, flopped down on a chair to open the envelope. The first lines seemed to her to be somehow alien and cold. "Hello, Anne. I'm sorry, but it's easier to write than to say in person. I turned out to be such a coward." The girl reread the first lines over and over again and could not believe that it was her lover who had written it. There was none of the usual tender words. Something inside stretched treacherously, like a string, and Anne became afraid that it was about to burst and she would die. Pulling herself together, she decided to finish reading it. But she read Jack's confession as if in a dream, like the worst dream of her life. Jack wrote that his parents wouldn't let them be together anyway. Next, that they had made up their minds long ago, and he was marrying a former classmate. The girl's father is his father's business partner, and his mother is supposedly very ill, and her heart couldn't take it if he went against their will. "It's better for both of us. I'm sorry, you'll definitely be happy." These were the last words of her beloved. After reading the letter to the end, Anne sat for a long time, hands down, staring into the darkness at the window behind the glass. It was pouring rain, as if mourning her love. If one were to look at the girl at that moment from a distance, one might take her for a stone statue. In the darkness of the room, she seemed to be a gray, lifeless creature. That evening, the girl's life seemed to be divided into before and after. She had had similar feelings on the day of her grandmother's funeral, only then the cause was death, and it was hard to blame anyone. Now in her adult life, the betrayal of a loved one was such a boundary between the past and the future. For a while, Anne lived without remembering, without understanding what was going on, and rather out of habit, went to class, then came back, went to bed, got up again, and went to school. It was still good that those were the last days within the walls of the institution. There were only a few organizational things to do. Get my honestly earned diploma, turn in my books to the library, and get my dorm room ready for release. When all this was done, Anne clearly decided for herself to flee from the past, erase the memory of everything, and start life from scratch. She, as an excellent student, was offered a job at the district hospital, but she decided to go as far away as possible to a huge city and lose herself forever. Years later, Anne often recalled how she tore such dear to her heart letters into tiny shreds and how the tears did not stop flowing down her cheeks. The girl well remembered how, leaving the dormitory, she put the hard-won white shoes for the wedding on the table, putting beside a note, "The new student for luck." It seemed to her that thus she got rid of everything that bound her to the past, and she went to meet and still unknown future. Sitting on the train, Anne looked at the scenery outside the window and was sure that she could never love or be loved again. Finding herself at the large and beautiful train station of a huge metropolis, she was instantly confused because it was a completely different world. The city reminded her of an anthill. Everyone was in a hurry. No one said hello to anyone. People didn't look like the people of her village who knew each other by name. In the city, everyone was preoccupied with his own thoughts, living his own, only he knew, life. Anne, finding herself in this new colored world, realized now she needed to get settled and start living anew, to learn a lot, learn a lot, learn a lot. For a long time, the girl could not find a place to live. As a student, she worked part-time as a nurse in the evenings during her studies. So she diligently saved up money for a future wedding. After all that had happened, Anne decided to use the money she had raised for new purposes and a new life. Going to the city, Anne thought that this stash would last her for a long time. But it turned out that even renting a decent place to live was impossible with that money. When she had already completely lost hope, she came across a small piece of paper on a pole near the train station. The price the landlady quoted was on the phone, arranged. True, it was almost all her money, but there was no choice. Anne found the address on a pre-purchased map of the city. It was very far from the train station, almost on the very outskirts. A small room in an old apartment on the first floor. All the furniture consisted of a nightstand, a bed, and a small, hand-wrought table. There wasn't even a closet in the room. There was nowhere to put it. True, there were a few coat hooks nailed behind the door. It was very poor, but clean. There were a beautiful flower and old woolen curtains on the little windowsill. The landlady was a thin old woman with kind eyes. Barbara at once, as if apologizing, said, "I'm sorry, dear. The room was the son of the deceased, and he drank a lot of furniture. It turned out that her son died 3 years ago, and she didn't want to rent, but life forced her to. It wasn't easy to live on one pension at one point and didn't have time to turn around, and the landlady was already back from her room, solemnly carrying old mirrors in her hand. How could such a beauty be without a mirror? And I have nothing to look in it, only my old age," she added sadly. That same evening, Barbara took her into the kitchen, almost ordering her to unashamedly use everything she saw. On the first day, the girl set out to find a job. The medical school graduate with perfect scores was immediately accepted into one of the city hospitals. Work in surgery was not easy, and you had to get almost an hour one way, but Anne was happy with everything. She agreed to all her shifts and substitutions for others, The hard work and the drive to and from it took a lot of energy and time, leaving no room for thoughts of the past. Despite her demanding schedule, and sometimes liked to walk one day, in the darkness of the street, she heard a soft cry or squeak. Turning in the direction from which the pitiful sounds came, Anne saw a small, shaggy lump with shiny eyes. It was an immature puppy, looking very unhappy. Anne picked it up in her arms. Not afraid to get it dirty, and held it close to her, she said, "Poor thing, where did you come from? All right, all right, all right, do not be afraid. Now let's go wash and feed him, and we'll get acquainted." When Anne came in with her new tenant, the landlady was only too happy. "I'll have more fun with the puppy while you're away at work," Barbara said as she took the baby in her arms. Again, a man in the house, the mistress added cheerfully. When the puppy was washed, he turned out to be a real miracle. All black, only one ear and hind legs were white. Anne was now happily rushing home, where she, wagging her tail, was met by a faithful friend. The owner was happy to tell about his oddities of the day. All would have been fine, if not for the unfortunate conflict with the surgeon. It hurt her to tears to be the best student, to wash floors in the hospital, and listen to reproaches of this spoiled brat. But there was nothing to do. She had to live on something. So she continued to come to work without much desire and with fear of every day. In spite of this, she tried to perform her duties impeccably. She washed and cleaned, and the patients loved her very much. But now they pity her and say, "Ah, they missed your golden hands. No one does injections better than you do." But the girl, just smiling sadly, replied, "Well, maybe it's still going to work out." She really hoped that the ill-fated Leo would someday change his anger for mercy and return her to her previous duties. But all remained unchanged, and she continued to clean the ward every morning. The day would begin with Leo demanding that the pay ward be cleaned to a shine. There were several rooms at the end of the corridor, separated from the rest by an archway of living plants. Each of the rooms had a small refrigerator and TV. In summer, the air conditioner worked. In winter, it was additionally possible to heat the rooms with a humidifier and a quartz lamp. Even the menu was special, albeit dietary, but exquisite, and was served directly to the wards. The attending physician of the patients in these wards was, of course, Leo himself. He spent most of his time here and fawned over every patient. Of course, a day's stay in this room cost almost as much as a month's wages. And on top of that, every time the relatives presented the chief physician with weighty bags of gifts, Anne seemed to expect it every time. Sometimes, when he received a bag of gifts and took a sneaky peek, he was clearly disappointed, and his attitude immediately changed. He would say goodbye coldly to his patients and leave at once, citing once she herself had seen a patient discharged after an appendicitis operation and put money into the surgeon's pocket. She looked away quickly at that moment, and after waiting for them to say goodbye, she went to prepare the room for the new patient. Immersed in her thoughts, Anne then changed the bedding, wiped the dust clean on the furniture and the windowsill. When her turn came to the little white nightstand, on one of the shelves she saw a phone. It was very beautiful and obviously expensive. The girl had only seen one of these on billboards or in the pages of magazines before. Her small button phone looked like a toy from the past century. The phone she found didn't have a single button, had a screen that she could look into like a mirror. Anne, in her 20s, was holding such an expensive device for the first time. She stared at the wonder of technology for a while. Then she gently touched the screen with her finger. The phone was not locked, and immediately a beautiful screensaver appeared. Anne even shuddered. She didn't think it was possible to turn on modern technology so easily. She didn't know what to do next. Her first thought was to take it to the head doctor, but that idea she immediately crossed out. Seeing him again was too much for her. Every meeting with that despot lately ended with a scandal and unfounded recriminations against her. The girl decided not to call for his thunder and lightning. And a little wait a little. And there then you see. And the owner of the lost will return, and thought, and put the phone in her robe pocket. The girl hoped all day long that someone would come for the phone, but the owner never showed up. In the evening, shut in the room where all her equipment was, Anne began to study fancy technology. She decided to find contacts for relatives, her mother, her father, or anyone else close to her. Anne didn't yet know which one the former patient had, but she wanted to find a number and report that she was missing. The girl pressed the wrong button for a long time, the screen going off and on again. Suddenly, old pictures started popping up, but very well processed. Anne was not going to pry into someone else's life and was about to turn the phone on, but her mother was on the screen. She was smiling, just as she was in the picture at her grandmother's house above the bed. She looked happy in the picture on the phone. There was some guy hugging her, and they were definitely in love. Anne couldn't understand how an old photo of her mom ended up with a patient from the VIP ward. And what could they have in common? After what had happened, she tried even harder to find her relatives' contacts. When she saw father in the phone book, she immediately dialed the number. She did not know how to do it from an expensive machine, so she decided to call from her own. At the other end, a low velvet voice answered. Anne timidly began, "Excuse me, this is the nurse from the hospital. We have a patient who forgot his phone. Your number is listed as father, so I thought I'd call you." The man listened, thanked me, and said he would try to come over as soon as possible. Literally half an hour later, a tall, gray-haired man found Anne in the ward, and with him was the same patient who had forgotten his phone. The men interjected, began thanking the girl and offering her money, which she flatly refused. When the guy tried to put bills into the pocket of her robe, as when checking out a surgeon, Anne answered quietly, but rather sharply, "I'm not taking the money." After a little silence, she added, "But I would be grateful if you could tell me how you got the picture of my mother in your phone." Seeing the surprise on the men's faces, Anne blushed heavily and realized she had given herself away. She confessed that she had gone into the phone, and as if to justify herself, she added, "I had to find at least someone's phone number of relatives to give away this expensive toy somehow." The young man's father was the first to start the conversation. His name, as it turned out, was Sergio, and his son's name was George. The man, smiling, said to Anne, "Dear young lady, take a closer look. I certainly have changed, but you can still recognize me in the picture." He held out his son's phone and really realized that it was him in the photo, only very young with no gray hair on his temples. Yeah, I was leaner then, and my hair was thicker. The years don't make you look any better. And next to me in the picture is my beloved wife, Emily. We've lived happily together for a long time, and we're still living happily ever after, waiting for grandchildren from that brat. He jokingly rubbed the young man's face and added, "Before you is the result of our love. George's only restless son." Smiling, he nodded away. Anne didn't understand anything. It seemed to her like some kind of dream. She couldn't be wrong. The picture was definitely her mother. "That's my mother," the girl said shyly. "Only she's long dead." "I'm sure of it. I didn't have to see her in person. She died as soon as I was born. And I only know her from her picture. Yes, I'll prove it to you now." The girl ran off, and a few minutes later returned with a photo yellowed by time. She handed the man the picture. "Look, that's my mother, Helga. She passed away. I would only be glad if she were alive." Sergio carefully took the picture from her hands and looked at it silently for a while. "Let me refute the statement about the death of the beauty in the picture. She is alive and unharmed. As you can see, he offered to come with us and see the girl with the photo in person, so to speak. They agreed that the very next day he would pick up the nurse after work, and she would visit them and meet the heroine of the photo personally. She was very afraid, not knowing why, but she could not refuse the meeting. She knew she would never get her mother back. By meeting her copy, she hoped to find the close relatives she had missed all these years. She prepared for this trip very carefully. Her hostess, upon learning of the event, meticulously helped her in choosing an outfit, and even at the end solemnly gave out a small brochure in the shape of a butterfly. It was given to me by my beloved husband, and it has always brought me good luck. Good luck to you, my girl, she said, and furtively wiped away a tear, crossed herself, and went to her room. A sweater and a skirt. She chose one that looked very much like the one her mother wore in the picture. She had always wanted very much to look like her, and looking at herself in the mirror that evening, it seemed to Anne that she was a reflection of her mother. The girl really did look a lot like her mother. The whole day she worked, thinking only of the upcoming meeting and looking forward to the evening. At the appointed time, Sergio was already waiting for her at the door of the hospital. "Good evening," he began, and seeing her timidity, he smiled and continued, "Well, why are you so confused? It's all good, and maybe we'll solve some mystery soon." Anne noticed that his voice trembled a little. It was obvious that Sergio himself was worried, but he tried not to show it. They hardly spoke on the way. Everyone was immersed in his own thoughts. The house they drove up to surprised Anne with its size. A 3-story cottage with huge windows on the first floor could hold a huge number of people. Anne could not imagine that only 3 people could live in such a mansion. At first glance, it seemed to her that this house could hold 4, if not 5, grandmother's houses. In front of the structure was a beautiful, well-kept lawn. A huge number of flower beds all around the perimeter indicated that the owners were very fond of flowers. They even felt at that moment how sorry they were that it was not the season and that there would be no opportunity to admire the flower beds and inhale the fragrance of this beauty. The girl timidly got out of the car and was afraid to take steps on the neatly laid out powerful paths. She tried to see everything as best she could, but she was shy. However, she noticed at once that she could feel the master's hand in everything. Everything was in its proper place and blended in perfectly with the overall look. "Well, what are you so confused about? Don't be afraid, nobody bites here." "Nobody bites here," said Sergio, taking Anne by the hand and guiding her toward the house. As soon as they crossed the threshold, a woman appeared in the hall, who resembled Anne's mother like 2 peas in a pod, only a little older. She held out her hand to the distraught girl and introduced herself. "Good afternoon. I'm Emily. And you, Anne? My husband told me everything yesterday. Come in, don't be shy." All the furnishings in the house were very beautiful and expensive, and as well as on the property, perfectly designed. That said, Anne noticed that everything was somehow particularly cozy. The beautiful oak furniture in the living room matched perfectly with the antique, perfectly restored sideboard. On the wall above the couch was a gallery of portraits of very different times, and in the kitchen, beautiful landscapes. Noticing the girl's interest in the canvases, Sergio, hugging his wife, said, "These are all my Emily's work," said. "For some time now she finds joy in it and gives it to us," as they sat around the table looking at the family photo album. Anne couldn't understand how Emily couldn't have known about her sister. When they were drinking tea later in the kitchen, the hostess, holding a photo of Anne and her mother, lamented, "I don't understand how this can be. For as long as I can remember, I have always lived with my parents. I was my only and very favorite daughter. They did everything so that I did not need anything. I'll show you a picture from our wedding. We're so happy there. We're so happy there," saying this with a kind of sadness. She quickly returned with a wedding picture of the elderly men and women standing next to them, holding hands and smiling happily. Emily said quietly, "1 year later, Mummy was gone, and 2 more years later, Daddy's heart stopped. That evening, Emily and Sergio asked a lot about Anne and her mother's life. But what could she tell if she had never seen her? Only how she missed her mother's caress and care, how she wanted, being older, to cuddle up and tell about all her troubles. They parted that evening as old and very good friends. The hosts asked them not to disappear and to definitely come and visit. At that moment, Sergio also decided he absolutely had to look into what had happened. The next morning he arrived at the office. He was the owner of a large construction company and ordered the security chief to find out all the details of the twins' birth. A couple of days later, everything became known. Many years ago, the girls were abandoned right in their parents' home. Immediately after the birth, their mother, having written a renunciation, disappeared, and no one ever saw her again. The girls were transferred to the baby house, and soon the pretty, healthy babies were taken away to families. Not just one, but it so happened that they were taken to different families. Anne's mother was taken away first. Her foster mother was Grandma Emma. At that time, she was still a young, full of strength woman, but very lonely. She had lost, immediately fell in love with the baby with brown eyes. She already knew for sure that she was going to take the girl. Only when it turned out that she had a sister, there were difficulties. The director of the orphanage persuaded her to take both of them. She explained that no other way was possible, that we couldn't separate the two little girls. The woman understood that she would not be able to raise two little girls in her own backwoods. But luckily for her, it turned out that the second baby was already being taken by a young couple from out of town. So it turned out that Helga, that was the name of Anne's mother, has been growing up in a small semi-Anden village with Emma's mother ever since. And the second of the sisters, Emily, lived in a town 1,000 kilometers away from a well-to-do family. Helga had all her outfits, for the most part, from her neighbors. And Emily's father brought them from abroad, where he was often on business trips. But neither of the sisters even suspected that somewhere there was a native blood, an exact copy of her sister, like a carbon copy. As soon as Emily found out all the details about her sister, she asked Anne to go with her to her grave. The very next free day, Sergio took them to the cemetery where Anne was born and lived for some time. They did not immediately find a wooden cross with a plaque with a photo. They sat there for a long time, crying silently. Then Emily said quietly, "I'm sorry, sis, that I didn't find it. I didn't find it." Already turning to her husband, she added, "Seriosh, we should put a monument, and I will plant beautiful flowers. Eventually, from afar, one could really see a modest but well-groomed grave that always had a lot of fresh flowers in season." From the day everyone knew the sister's secret, Anne began to be treated in that family as a close relative, tried in every way to help support her. They insisted that she not return to the wilderness, but stay in town. Her aunt, who was now the girl's real family, took care of her in every way. Through acquaintances, she helped her find a completely affordable separate, albeit small, apartment. The price was symbolic. The landlady, a friend of Emily's, had left for a year on a contract in another region and was happy to let her work. It was necessary to pay the utilities and take care of the houseplants. Everything was working out just fine. One sad, unresolved issue remained. Anne kept scrubbing floors instead of doing what she loved, helping people. When Sergio learned that she had an excellent medical degree, he asked in surprise, "Is the only thing they teach there is to take out ducts and scrub floors to a shine?" Anne couldn't take it anymore and told the whole story. Sergio, learning of the conflict with the superintendent in charge, quickly resolved the matter. It turned out that a longtime friend of his worked at the Ministry of Health, and after learning about what was happening in the surgical department of the city hospital, he initiated an inspection. It went quickly and efficiently. The chief physician was removed from his position, and not only him. It turned out that a couple of other doctors, a senior nurse of the department, were involved. The road to medicine was closed to them forever. The newly arrived supervisor carefully studied the personnel files and was very surprised that such a competent graduate washed the windows and floors. He immediately appointed Anne to the position of head nurse. When he announced this, when he gathered all the staff on the ward, there was a pause for a second. Lily glanced at Anne angrily. She herself didn't mind being in that position. Status and a good salary had always attracted the girl. Only the knowledge and experience, of course, was not there. After a minute or two, there was timid applause. Since that day, Anne's attitude in the department had changed greatly, as had her mood. Now she was happily rushing to work in the morning, and even the guard at the entrance resigned himself to the fact that she came before everyone else and left by herself the last one. She was willing to spend 24 hours a day on the ward for the work she loved. Patients regretted only one thing, that now she rarely gave injections and used herself. All the patients said that she was the only one with a light hand. If someone was going to be operated on, they would begrudgingly beg her to be their assistant. This often happened because the new chief doctor predicted a girl great future and insisted on further training. She understood this herself and was already diligently preparing for college. She was busy with everything in the hospital during the day and spent her nights reading her books. She really became irreplaceable in the department. She had time to perform the duties of a head nurse and to replace the ordinary medical personnel. One day, the nurse on duty was late in the morning. She gave advance notice, and she herself went to make an appointment. There was a newcomer lying in the recovery room. During the night, an emergency surgery was performed on a man in his 50s. An analysis had to be taken. Anne did everything, as always, flawlessly. It turned out that the patient needed donor blood, and it was required urgently. The blood type was very rare and RAF factor negative. The department was out of the necessary material. Anne, having carefully studied the patient's chart, was surprised, but she had exactly the same blood type with the same Rh factor. Anne was well aware that such coincidences are rare and clearly indicate a kinship, but the girl thought first of all about the patient's life. Anne immediately went to the head doctor. The patient needs blood. The transfusion station will not bring it until the afternoon at the earliest. I have exactly the same. I'm ready to give. The chief doctor looked at the girl over his glasses in surprise, but he could not trust her, the young nurse always made the right decisions. Transfusion did not come easily. Perhaps the excitement and anxiety took its toll. The girl almost fainted, and her colleagues could hardly bring her back to her senses. In general, everything went well, and after a few days the patient felt much better. At one of the rounds, the chief physician standing at this patient's bedside said, "Everything went very well. You have our Anne to thank. Although I advise you to think about it. Such a coincidence, a rare group, usually indicates related genes. I suggest a DNA test." The chief physician winked at the patient and left the room, leaving him brooding. Without waiting to be discharged, he made up his mind. He had rehearsed the conversation with his savior several times since the morning and didn't know how best to begin it, but he finally made up his mind. As soon as the girl appeared in the room, she heard her voice and looked silently at the sick man. She was already thinking of talking to him herself, but the man beat her to it. "Thank you so much," the patient began timidly. "If it weren't for you, I don't know if I'd be alive. The doctor said that a blood match suggests the possibility of kinship. Where are you from? Who are your parents?" At that moment, something in her soul clenched. She was afraid to even hope that it was her father, but secretly she believed in a miracle. When she began to tell where and with whom she had lived, about her mother, everything she knew, she understood from the eyes of Alex, the patient's name, that a miracle was possible. Already in those moments, she realized she had finally found her father. They decided to document it by taking a DNA test. They waited impatiently for the result, and after receiving it, they hugged each other, sat in silence and cried for a long time. My father talked about how he and Helga had met, how they loved each other, and how they were getting ready to get married. But then he and Mom were young and stupid, broke up over some nonsense, said a lot of silly things to each other. He didn't even know she was pregnant, went straight into the army, and after that he stayed in town. A couple of times he tried to look for her. Helga carefully concealed that she was from the outback, pretending to be from the city, and he sincerely believed that she was from the same town. He looked for her in the neighborhood where they lived, but no one knew where the girl disappeared. For hours on end, the two sat in silence in the room, holding hands, unable to believe what had happened. The father cried, stroked Anne's hair, and said, "Forgive me, my daughter. For the love of God, forgive me. I have no family, no children. I thought I would never have one. I lived with my wife for 20 years. God never gave me any children. Took my wife away, too. She died 2 years ago. Now I am so happy that I have a little daughter." It was as if he could not believe what had happened. That evening they sat hand in hand for a long time and talked about their lives. Anne at last was able, as in childhood dreams, to rest her head against her father's chest and tell of all the troubles, resentments and joys. They found out about their happy meeting in the local newspaper, and in a couple of days they were front-page heroes. After being discharged from the hospital, Alex insisted that his daughter move in with him. "What are you going to do, wander around in corners? Pay money. And I'm alone in the mansion." He said, "When we met, Anne, move in with me. It's more fun together. I'm at work all day, and you're not sitting at home. And in the evenings we'll drink tea." Anne was embarrassed, but her father insisted, and she moved into her father's apartment. The girl was happy every night to learn more and more details of his life and to tell about herself. Her father did live in a huge apartment, almost in the center of the city. A large hall, kitchen, dining room with a huge round table and 3 whole rooms. When they first arrived, while she was looking around, her father said sadly, "The apartment was inherited from my wife's grandmother. We could have sold and bought something smaller, but my wife and I had hoped to have a big family, no less than 5 children and many grandchildren. We even kept a big dining room table." He stopped talking abruptly and never came back to it. Anne understood. For him, it was like an open wound. The girl settled in one of the rooms. The room was not very large, but well thought out and very bright. A large window overlooked the sunny side and the park, which made the room seem never cloudy. All the furniture was chosen in the same light tone. There was also a carved bed, a nightstand, a neat table with a mirror, and a closet with a fine line of gilt. Everything was somehow light and airy. It was as if the room had been knowingly prepared for a girl, adored her. Anne was too shy to ask who it was intended for, but the aura in the room was very good, and she liked the place immediately. After moving in, her father suggested inviting an aunt and her family to visit to get acquainted. He already knew the relatives from his daughter's stories and was in a hurry to meet them, because they turned out to be completely alone. People who had miraculously found each other and were happy to communicate with new relatives. The first weekend they set the table together and had a very family and warm meal with the new relatives who arrived with a big cake. George dropped by for a few minutes, met her father, and apologetically ran off. Anne felt that she was now the happiest person in the world. She is not alone. There is an aunt, a brother, albeit a cousin, a father. Ahead of her cherished goal is medical school, and every day waits her favorite job. Now they often call relatives, and they became such good friends with her brother that they saw each other almost every day. She worked near his office, and he could even show up at lunchtime, even after work, call her in a nearby pastry shop for coffee and a favorite cake. Anne was not even surprised by another such proposal and promised to be free in half an hour. She tried to finish everything quickly, and when she went into the pastry shop, she was surprised. Her brother was not at the table alone. Sitting next to him was a gorgeous, long-haired blonde and a young man whose gaze gave her the creeps. The brother stood up. "Meet my found by chance sister Anne, but now my only and most beloved," taking her sister under his arm. He led her over to the girl for the table and continued in the same tone. "And this is my favorite. I hope she'll be my wife, Kate." He winked and, nodding toward the handsome man at the table, said, "This is my faithful and devoted friend Max. Unmarried. No children. Please pay attention." The girl could not get used to her brother's jokes, was afraid to raise her eyes to Max, and just silently held out her hand. The black eyes under a fan of long lashes were as if drawn by a good artist. Short-cropped hair added even more charm. When Max smiled, saying he was very pleased to meet her, Anne realized she was lost. At first she felt uncomfortable in this company. It was obvious that they had known each other for a long time. They had a lot in common and had a lot in common and had a lot to remember. But after half an hour, she had completely forgotten that she hardly knew the guys. Communication was easy and straightforward. The guys kept joking and telling jokes, and the girls just laughed and asked to stop. When it was time to part ways, Max asked to walk with her, and she, of course, couldn't resist. They decided to walk, leaving Max's car at the hospital. They walked along the evening streets for a long time. Max turned out to be a very kind and simple guy. He was a correspondence student and worked for a construction company. They had a lot in common. They read the same books, watched the same movies, and even liked the weather, the seasons, and cartoons the same way. That evening they both didn't want to part, but the time was well past midnight, and they agreed to meet the next day. At night the girl went to bed smiling happily. She never once remembered the past bitter experience of love, only waited for the soonest coming of the next day. She wanted to see Max again and talk about anything, as long as they were together, as long as they were together, as long as they were together, as long as they were near each other. They began to see each other every day. A week later, Max came to meet her from work with a huge bouquet of flowers and began at once. "Anne, please do not interrupt me. I could only dream of a girl like you. Immediately I realized that this is the kind of wife I want to see by my side. Marry me. Maybe it's silly to hear after a week. Acquaintance, but I love you." The girl was taken aback, but suddenly realized that she was afraid of losing him, and decided, whatever happens. Somehow at once, in the same breath, very quietly, she said, "I agree." That same evening he took her to meet her mother. The boy's father died at a construction site a long time ago, when the boy was not yet 3, and he lived all these years with his mother. Elena turned out to be a very pleasant woman of short stature and kind eyes. She saw that she was very worried. Immediately said, "Don't worry, I won't eat you. Moreover, such a protector as my son will always protect you now." As she led the girl into the room, the woman confessed that she was the one who forced her to bring her here, as they sat at the table and drank tea. With his mother's favorite cake, the boy said, "Mom, I proposed today." She said yes. "I suggest we go to her father's house soon. I'll ask him to marry me." The woman, holding back tears, walked up to the girl and hugging her said, "I am very happy for you children. Daughter, I am very happy that my son will have such a wonderful wife. I hope your father will not mind your marriage too." On her day off, the girl, worried, set the table. Her father helped by arranging the chairs and dishes. When she learned that her niece was getting married, her aunt told her she wanted to be there. They came in their full complement, Emily, Sergio, and of course Brother George. They began to help right away, and by the time her mother came and everything was ready, Anya's excitement quickly faded. It seemed as if everyone there had known each other for a long time. They actively discussed at the table how and where they would celebrate the wedding, what kind of champagne, how much to buy, where to find lipstick. It was as if, without even asking the young people, they were already deciding all for them. Max only cheerfully tried to insert, "Maybe someone will ask my wife and I," to which Sergio replied, "Your business is small. To love each other and kiss each other soundly at the wedding. So practice." Time passed. For the wedding anniversary, they decided to set up that big table in the living room. Everyone who was at the matchmaking party except Anne herself gathered in her father's apartment, so it was a coincidence that this was the moment when everyone couldn't sit down at the table until they heard the news from the maternity hospital. Early in the morning, she went into labor, and her husband drove her there. And now the table was set with the most exquisite dishes, but everyone was just waiting for Sergio and Alec. The phone rang. After listening to the speaker, the young father happily threw the phone on the couch and, hugging his mother, shouted, "Congratulations to Mom on her new title, twice a grandmother. I have 2 daughters. I'm the luckiest dad ever." What began in the apartment? Everyone was hugging, kissing, congratulating each other. That evening, the toasts were not only to the happiness of the young, but to the health of the mommy and daughters. Instead of a celebratory salute at the table, the news that George and Kate have decided to get married to sounded. But the surprise to those present was another piece of news. The father came up and said, "That's it, it's time. I want this date to be a memorable one for all of us. But in our own way, we are grandparents now, and we have the right to say whatever we think. Elena, marry me. Let everyone have everything." The woman was confused, but to the applause and cheers she could not refuse, and she kissed her fiancé.